Hello and welcome to Cisco ASA Training 101. My name is Don Crawley. I'm with SoundTraining.net. We're the Seattle, Washington-based provider of accelerated training for IT professionals. We work in the areas of Cisco and Linux products plus customer service training for IT pros. This time we're doing understanding the 8 basic commands on an ASA security appliance. It's based on Chapter 1 in my book, The Accidental Administrator, Cisco ASA Security Appliance, a step-by-step configuration guide. Not required for the video, but if you'd like to purchase a copy, it's available from Amazon and through other channels. The video is based on ASA software version 8.441, although the techniques I'm going to show you really apply on pretty much any version of 8.3 or later. There's some pretty significant differences before 8.3, so anything 8.3 or later will work. So let's take a look at how we're going to do this. First of all, in order to understand how to configure an ASA, there's a couple of things that you need to understand. One is the concept of named interfaces, because the ASA and other firewalls as well do this, where they will name an interface and then they will assign security levels to the interface. The idea is that traffic can flow from a network behind a higher security level to a network behind a lower security level, relatively unimpeded, but not the other way around. If you take a look at the diagram, you'll see what I'm talking about. Our office LAN has a security level of 100. The internet has a security level of 0. You can initiate a connection from the office LAN to the internet, relatively unimpeded, but not the other way around. You can't initiate a connection from the internet to the office LAN. Same thing going to the DMZ. The DMZ can initiate a connection to the internet. The office LAN can initiate a connection to the DMZ, but not the other way around. Now you may be thinking, gosh, you've got a web server and a mail server in the DMZ. What if you want to initiate a connection from the internet to either one of those servers, which you certainly might want to? Well, in order to do that, we have to implement static NAT and access control lists, and that's really beyond the scope of the video, but I did want to mention that. Let's go ahead and take a look at the diagram we're going to use for this particular demonstration. We have a management workstation with static IP address configurations as shown in the diagram. I'm not going to recite them to you. You can see them there. And we have the ASA with an inside interface, 192.168.106.1, and an outside interface configured as a DHCP client. Now, this configuration, along with a written guide to this video, is available online at our website at www.soundtraining.net/8basic. You can see it there on screen, and if you just go there, you can download it. It's available for free. Now, here are the basic 8 commands. We'll start with the interface command, which just allows us to specify the interface that we're working on. Then the name if command, which allows us to name an interface. Maybe we want to name it inside or outside or DMZ, whatever. Security level is how we assign a security level. Now, that security level is assigned by default when we name an interface inside or outside. But suppose that we name it DMZ. Well, it doesn't assign it by default, so we might have to do that. IP address is how we assign either a static IP address or make an interface a DHCP client. You'll see that in a moment. Switch port access is a Cisco switch command, which is where we make a physical interface, such as interface Ethernet 0/0, a member of a switch virtual interface, such as VLAN 1. Object network and NAT are the commands that we use to configure port address translation. And then finally, the route command is how we assign a default route. Now let's take a look at each of the commands in a little more detail, and what I've done is I've grouped each of the commands in what I think is a logical grouping. You'll be the judge on that, but let's start with the interface name if, IP address, and security level commands. First of all, interface VLAN 1. That just simply says we're going to configure interface VLAN 1. We're going to use the name if command to give it the name inside. As soon as we do that, the appliance automatically associates the security level 100 with the interface. Does that by default. You can change it if you want to, but typically you wouldn't. Then we give it the IP address of 192.168.106.1. You'll notice that the subnet mask is conspicuous by its absence in this case because the security appliance automatically assigns a default mask based on the class of the address. So that's a Class C address. The default mask on that is a 24-bit mask, and that's what the security appliance does automatically. We don't have to configure it. You can, but there's no reason to do that. If you wanted to use a non-standard mask, like say a 27-bit mask or something like that, then you would have to explicitly configure that. Next we go to interface VLAN 2, and we use the name if command to give it the name outside. It automatically sets the security level to 0 by default for the outside, and again you can change that if you want to, but typically you wouldn't. Now you'll notice here I gave it the IP address of 12.3.4.5, and I had to explicitly provide the 24-bit mask of 255.255.255.0 because the 12 network is a class A, so it would automatically assign it an 8-bit mask. I don't want to do that, so that's why I had to explicitly provide it. By the way, if you're not familiar with what I mean by an 8-bit mask or a 24-bit mask or class A or class C, there's a lot of tutorials available on the internet about TCP/IP fundamentals. Probably ought to spend a little bit of time with that before we go on. But if you're okay with it, then we'll go on. I grabbed this screen capture off of a 5540 that I was configuring just so you could see the difference between configuring a 5510, 20, 40, or 50 compared to a 5505. The difference is that on the 5510, 20, 40, and 50, we assign the names to the physical interfaces instead of the switch virtual interfaces, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. Now we use the switch port access command. This again is on a 5505 to make our physical interfaces members of a VLAN. So we go to interface E0/0. We use the switch port access VLAN 2 command to make it a member of VLAN 2. We issue the no shutdown command to make sure to bring the interface up. Do the same thing except with Ethernet 0/1 we make it a member of VLAN 1. Now here's the configuration for port address translation, which is considerably different from previous versions of the ASA software. Starting with version 8.3, Cisco began using network objects as part of the port address translation configuration. So here's how it's done. In configuration mode, we use the command object network to say we're going to create a network object. We give it a name, and it could be anything you want. This is just a text string. I like to use descriptive names, so I use net-192.168.106. Then we say what type of network object it is. In this case, it's going to be a subnet, and I specify the subnet, which is 192.168.106.0, again with a 24-bit mask of 255.255.255.0. Just a comment on this, you can do all kinds of interesting things with this. One of them that you may want to consider is instead of using the subnet command, you can specify range. So we would say range, and then we would specify the beginning and ending IP addresses of the range that we want to allow to use NAT. Just an option. I'm not going to demo it, but something to consider. Next, we use the NAT command. That simply means that we're going to enable NAT. Then we use the real interface, so that's inside, to the mapped interface, which in this case is outside. That just simply means that the traffic can flow from inside to outside. And then we specify the type of NAT. In this case, it's dynamic as opposed to static. And then we use the interface command to say use whatever address is on the outside interface. We could provide an explicit IP address there, but this is frankly easier and simpler in most cases. Now the last part of this is to provide a default route. So we use the route command, and then we say that we're going to use the outside interface, and the 0 and 0 is simply shorthand for 0.0.0.0 and 0.0.0.0, meaning any address that we don't know what to do with otherwise, that's not in our routing tables otherwise, we want to send it to our default gateway at 12.3.4.6. Now there's another way to do this, and frankly on an ASA 5505 especially, which is often used in a small office, home office environment, this is probably what you're going to do. Here you see we went into interface VLAN 2, which by default is the outside interface, and even if you go in and configure it manually, that's typically what you're going to do. So we'll go to interface VLAN 2, and then to assign an IP address to it, we use the IP address, ADD is just short for address, DHCP, which makes it a DHCP client. Then we use the set route statement to tell it to obtain its default route from the DHCP server. Then just to make my point here, I use the show route command, and you can see in the output of the show route command that indeed it did pick up its default gateway. The gateway of last resort is what Cisco calls it, of 192.168.1.1 from the DHCP server. Here's the settings for the computer. You do need to manually configure your computer for this, and honestly, in most settings you'd use a DHCP server, but for the purpose of this demonstration we're doing it manually. So here you can see I set it up with an IP address of 192.168.106.2, 24-bit mask. The gateway is the firewall. You may wonder about the DNS server addresses, and those addresses are for OpenDNS. You could use Google or your own private DNS server. I just happen to like the OpenDNS servers, and so those are the addresses, and anybody can use those. Here's the disclaimer. This video is provided solely as a courtesy to you, our viewer. There's no guarantees whatsoever. Please do not attempt these procedures on a production firewall without first testing them for security and suitability in a laboratory environment. And performing these procedures, even correctly, may open your firewall to the public internet and subject your network to attack. So make sure you have current backups and take precautions, including data encryption and additional access controls to protect sensitive data. Prerequisites. In order to do this exercise, you should have the following: an understanding of TCP/IP, including subnetting, experience working in the Cisco command line environment, and unrestricted privilege mode access to a Cisco ASA security appliance. The equipment software requirements: we're using a Cisco ASA 5505 security appliance with base license and a blank configuration. The procedures that I'll show you should work on a 5510, 2040, or 50 with minor changes in the interface configuration. You'll also need one computer connected to the inside interface, and the outside interface should be connected to the internet, or what I'm doing in my lab is I have it connected to a router, which in turn is connected to the internet. And you'll need terminal emulation software such as PuTTY. You could use Secure CRT, TerraTerm, or anything that you prefer. The one that I'm going to use is PuTTY. All right, let's go ahead and get started now, and we're going to start by configuring the interfaces. So let's go into configuration mode, so config T, and then interface VLAN 1, which is our inside VLAN. So we're going to do name if inside, and notice that the appliance sets the security level for the inside interface to 100 by default, no surprise there. And let's go to interface VLAN 2 and do the same thing, but we'll name it outside. So name if outside. And notice what happens. It sets it to security level of 0 by default. Now let's go ahead and make our physical interfaces members of the VLANs, the appropriate VLANs. And before I do that, I want to show you the default configuration. So just out of the box, here's the VLAN membership. We're going to do the command show switch VLAN. And there you can see that by default, all of the interfaces are members of VLAN 1, the inside interface. The only thing we need to change is we need to make interface Ethernet 0/0, which is connected to our router on the internet. We need to make it a member of VLAN 2, so let's do that right now. We'll go to interface E0/0, and we're going to do switch port access VLAN 2, and that makes it a member of VLAN 2. You can see that again with the command show switch VLAN. And there you can see that now Ethernet 0/0 is a member of VLAN 2. Let's go ahead and bring it up. So we're going to do no shut. And once again, we'll repeat that last command. You can see now it's up. Let's go to interface E0/1 and bring it up as well. No shut. We'll repeat that show switch VLAN. And now you can see both of them are up, which is how we want it. So now we're done with naming the interfaces and making them members of VLANs, but we still need to assign IP addresses to them. So let's start with interface VLAN 2. So int VLAN 2. And we're going to make it a DHCP client. So we're going to do IP address. ADD is short for address. DHCP. And we want to pick up our default gateway from the DHCP server on the internet. So we're going to do set route as well. Now let's configure VLAN 1, the inside, so interface VLAN 1 and IP ADD. We're going to give it an explicit IP address instead of a dynamic. We'll give it a static one. So 192.168.106.1. And notice that we didn't put a mask on there, and again, that's because it's a Class C address, so the firewall, by default, will give it a 24-bit mask. And since that's what we want, we don't need to make any changes. Normally, this time, we'd go and configure a default route, but since we used the IP ADD DHCP set route command earlier, we don't need to do that. It will have picked that up automatically. In fact, let's just check and see. Let's do the show route command and see if it got one, and indeed it did. Look at that at the bottom where it says D**. That is the default gateway, which it picked up via DHCP. So we don't have to do that. Last thing we have to do is we have to configure port address translation. Pretty straightforward. We're now using network objects, as I mentioned earlier. So the first thing we're going to do is create our network objects. So we're going to do object, network, and then give it a name, net-192. .168.106. Again, that's just a text string. You could call it, whatever you want. Fido, Billy Bob, doesn't matter. And now, what type of a network object is it? It's going to be a subnet. 192.168.106.0 with a 24-bit mask again. And now we'll configure NAT. So NAT, and then the real address or interface. So that would be inside, comma, and then the mapped address or interface, which is outside. Now the type of NAT could be static or dynamic. We're going to do dynamic. And then we're going to use the statement interface to tell the firewall to pick up its IP address from the outside interface, whatever that is. And that's really all we have to do. If we've done it right, we should be able to go hit a website now. So let's go see what happens. Let's bring up a browser. We'll use Internet Explorer. We could use Chrome or Firefox, doesn't really matter, just some browser. And let's see if we can hit a website. So let's go to www.soundtraining.net, a website I recommend you visit frequently. And there it is. So success. What we've just done is a very basic configuration, and it gives you the foundation upon which you can then build a much more sophisticated configuration on your Cisco ASA security appliance. But this is a starting point. That's all it's meant to be. It's also intended to help you understand some of the basic commands in configuring a Cisco ASA security appliance. If you'd like more information, please visit our website at www.soundtraining.net. I blog at soundtraining.net/blog. You can follow us on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. If you'd like more videos, we have plenty of them on our video channel at www.soundtraining.net/videos. You can subscribe and you'll get a notification anytime we add a new video. And if you'd like the companion book, it's available at our bookstore at www.soundtraining.net/bookstore. For soundtraining.net, I'm Don Crawley. Hope it's been helpful. See you next time.